Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Now, I'm very happy to say, often a difficult man to get hold of, so I'm really delighted to say that EOIN REDDAN, European Cup winner, of course, Irish international, is with us to reflect on an extraordinary weekend, I suppose, the finale to this European season. EOIN REDDAN, long time no talk. It's good to have you back on the show.
Thanks, Joe. Good to be back, yeah. And what a week to be on. I suppose a lot happened.
We were just talking very, very briefly before we started there, and you just remarked, man, what a weekend. And it was extraordinary. So give us your overarching take on what O'Gara has done and what Leinster are to make of yet another close but no cigar season in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, on the Leinster side, I suppose, all you're doing, you focus on process, you focus on everything throughout the year to give yourself the best chance of winning. But there's no contract that ever says if you do all these things, you definitely will win. And they've been through so many finals at this stage that there aren't that many lessons there for them in terms of, how to win a final. You have to show up. You have to know when to go for it. You have to know when you're in the ascendancy and when you don't have to go for it. And I say that really, there's very, very few times when you're in a final when you don't have to go for it, actually, right? It's probably the biggest lesson in trying to win them is knowing what that actually means minute to minute in a game. Because on the one hand, it sounds like just go for everything and see what happens, but that's not really what it is. But Leinster have been through that, and I think that the one thing that struck me about La Rochelle was they did that, and they made mistakes and they threw bad passes, and the body language after each bad pass was definitely, tap on the back, let's keep going, which was unusual for them and for French rugby, right? There was no, people losing the cool. Their discipline was poor, but it wasn't, apart from the free kick, apart from the trip, which was, probably nearly costing the game. Apart from that, those penalties were very much kind of in the spirit of going for it, right? They were like at the heart of the breakdown. They were part of a bigger plan. So I didn't think it was the kind of indiscipline of old. It was more part of their plan. And I think they got lucky in that the penalties they gave away were so kickable that Leinster couldn't really turn them down.
Do you think that was deliberate on La Rochelle's part? We're willing to give you these three, or just the way it unfolded?
I think it was the way it unfolded. I think, unless rugby's moved on to a different stratosphere, it's hard in the heat of the moment to think that clearly about exactly where you are. I mean, in terms of the width of the pitch even, right? And I think, they would have been going in there, I would have thought, trying to be disciplined. Like penalties, like, being offside would have been a killer for them, or lying on the wrong side would have been a killer for them. But they were almost prepared to take the ones where they were competing hard for the ball. And if they got that wrong, they were kind of, that's part of the strategy of really trying to bully Leinster and going after their ruck ball and trying to slow it down as much as possible. So I think they got lucky in terms of where the penalties were. That said, right, given the way the game went, you don't know if Leinster had gone to the corner and scored tries, how La Rochelle would have bounced back. They certainly had the right atmosphere, I thought, within their team to have that kind of attitude of they could have come again no matter what Leinster had done, in my view. I think it was a very much more evenly matched game than as a fan I would have predicted. I thought it would be closer than what the bookies had, but I just didn't see it being that physical, that hard for that long, and both teams being so close for that long.
So you make that very interesting observation about going for it. So from a Leinster point of view, maybe expand on that. What do you, as a professional who's been there and done it in these kind of environments, I suspect going for it is very different to playing Babas rugby. What do you mean by going for it? And were there instances where you looked at Leinster on Saturday and thought, ooh, I'm not sure here?
No, I think they equally went for it, right? I think they've been down that road and learned that lesson. And going for it means, I suppose, it doesn't actually change. Like the Babas rugby is this changing in decision making, right? But for a hooker who's thrown the ball, he's not afraid of giving it an extra bit of zip. Or for me, when I'm passing the ball to the 10, I'm not in any doubt about what I'm doing. I'm giving that an extra bit of zip. So everything's just got a bit of zip. It's not that I'm going to throw it between my legs, right? It's having the kind of confidence that you've done the work, that today's the day to shine and show all the work, and to go for, you know, to not kind of take a bit off the pass because you know it'll get there and, you know, it'll be fine and no one will really notice. It's the day really where you're absolutely buzzing and going for those passes that you've planned in training, that in a match you think, like Dante threw one or two where you just knew what he was supposed to do, and, you know, was he going to go for it? The ball looked like it was 30 degrees and wet and slippy, and he went for it, you know, and it opened Leinster up a few times, and then a few times it went wrong. But I think that was probably their lesson, right? You had a coach who'd been there numerous times and lost in finals. They had been through that last year. And I think worryingly for me, I think they'll learn a huge amount from it. I think you can get away in some finals without having to do that, right? So, you know, there are finals where you end up in and you're just that much better than the other team by the way the draw went, that you can kind of win that final, and, you know, and maybe you don't learn the lessons that other teams have to in finals. But I don't think that La Rochelle would have won that game without 100% the mindset for every minute of the game at the weekend. And I think they had that. And I think that's probably what got them there. I think Leinster had it as well. But I think this time the ball fell for La Rochelle. And, you know, I think worryingly with that knowledge, like, I mean, you know, I was an eternal loser in rugby matches and finals until I was 24. And people kept saying you learn a lot when you lose. But I remember the first trophy that I won, and I remember thinking, you know, you also learn a hell of a lot when you win. So I'd be concerned, or whatever way you want to look at it, but I think they'll be a force to be reckoned with going forward. You know, I think they'll have a belief and a confidence and a know-how with a unique group of athletes, I have to say, in terms of size and power.
So going for it, you're talking there about playing with a certain authority, going through all the things you do with a certain authority and intent, and committing to every little thing that you're doing the way you have done for much of the season. So if we extend that point for one more question, most of us onlookers would look at Leinster against Toulouse, and I totally appreciate Toulouse were a very different prospect at the Aviva Stadium, tired a week on from the Munster game to La Rochelle. But that said, Leinster played with that real intent that day, and we saw the shape. You know, we saw Tyg Furlong in a pod and another pod out the back of him, and options and people running at different angles, and it was all working in a kind of amazing harmony. And it was one of the reasons people thought that they would win at the weekend. Like, I don't remember that, bar the first 10 minutes, I don't remember feeling Leinster were ever in that zone to any great extent. And I couldn't work out, was it something La Rochelle were doing in defence that made it difficult for Leinster to get those pods organised and to get that play organised, or was there a slight degree of tentativeness about Leinster? So
there was a huge difference in terms of, you know, Toulouse and La Rochelle defence, right? In I would say in nearly all aspects, right? I think one of them you'd be scoring, you know, 9, 10 out of 10, you know, in terms of efforts for a final, and one of them, and Toulouse would have been quite poor, right? Their defence was not good, and even in the Munster game, like, the more Munster held onto the ball, the worse Toulouse looked. They looked great with the ball, counter-attack, and that's what got them through, really. And then when Leinster played them, Leinster kept the ball all day and really showed up, like, brought the game to the point where, you know, Toulouse's weakest point was playing against Leinster's strongest point, which was the Leinster attack against Toulouse's defence. So the final was totally different in that, you know, La Rochelle probably were defence was probably their number one, their best tactic, right? They defended high, they were very aggressive, and they were incredibly hard at the breakdown, which nullified a lot of what Leinster were trying to do, right? It disrupted their pattern, disrupted their rhythm. It was harder for them to run onto the ball. And then few balls went behind, shoulders went behind, passes to inside shoulder, which was unusual. But that all happens from rucks being a bit slower than you thought and guys taking off a bit earlier. So I think, you know, if Leinster had the game again, you know, they'd be looking at a few, you know, kind of one-off, unbelievably calamitous moments, which cost them the game. And they could explain away that and sleep well at night, I think, if it wasn't a final, saying, look, we did actually play it really well, but this bounced off, you know, our player and went into touch, and that was a, you know, goal line dropout instead of a scrum back. And then from the dropout, the drop goal bounces over Johnny's head, lands short of the try line. So a few things happen, but I think if they had the game over again, I think that you'd probably see an aggression like you hadn't seen before around the breakdown. That maybe, that if you had the game again, you'd be tougher around there and more, and kind of, try and nullify that threat that Racing had. That La Rochelle had.
Was watching in the Virgin studio, and Shane Horgan half remarked to Rob Kearney beside him. He was like, "Geez, you could imagine Shane Jennings out there."
Yeah. That
kind of attitude, I suppose. And so I totally accept anyone who's making the point that La Rochelle won this by the skin of their teeth at the death, and there were a number of those odd rugby moments where it's sometimes your day and sometimes it's not your day, and these things happen. And so, what can you say? Leinster still had a great season. I suppose where it gets interesting from a Leinster perspective is this hasn't happened the year after they've just won the tournament, where you can say, look, what can you do? You can't win them all. This is now, I suppose, part of a small-ish pattern, 4-year pattern, where they might have felt they could have had a good go in Europe and 2 finals in there. So is there any trend across the 4 that you would say, oh, that is slightly worrying, that on these big occasions, after sauntering through much of the season, X, Y, or Z seems to crop up at these vital moments?
Yeah, I think it for me, it makes you realise how hard these trophies are to win, right? And I think for a while you can kind of fall into the trap where, you underestimate that. At the weekend, it's just hard to fathom how flat it all was afterwards. I don't think it's going to get easier to win these trophies. I'm sure that I actually think the tournament could be headed for, potentially a massive stage in world rugby, in that I think it could become the tournament to win around the globe for players, and maybe even to the point where you haven't won it until you've won this medal. And that's to do with the South African players joining. I think the credibility of this tournament is going to go through the roof. I think the standard involved, or the standard of play, is going to go through the roof even higher. I think people are going to be bigger. It's going to be more physical. And I think that, you'll see South African teams getting stronger each year now when as they join and play in this amazing tournament, which is already capturing the eye right across the world. So I don't think it's going to get any easier to win. And, we're still always battling, I believe. We don't really lose. Every time you lose a game at this level, it's always comes down to, yes, it can come down to a few, calamitous errors. But, the trend that you see is usually around power and size, right? Same with international level. So we're always trying to find ways of keeping the ball in play longer, which nullifies that sometimes, and coming up with different smart ways of beating that. And we'll have to continue to do that, right, for all the provinces and for Ireland. So that concern was there before the weekend. It's still there. And unfortunately, I think this is one that just, the last few minutes were hard to believe, right, what happened. And I think, Leinster did a lot right this year in terms of getting everything right and giving themselves a massive chance to win. And in the end, they didn't get there. But I think it's going to be harder going forward, actually. And that's leaving aside disappointments and stuff, which I don't really, I think they'll dust themselves down well. And there's enough variety around Irish camp, Leinster, Munster. There's enough for the provinces at home in Ireland. There's enough different focuses for them to move on pretty quickly, and they've had to do it a number of times, so I'm not too worried about that.
By all means, shoot this down, but you're a scrum half, so maybe you've experienced this before, potentially. But Bernard Jackman, in his piece of the weekend, was remarking on the fact that Leinster had slow ball by comparison with what they're used to. And for much of the season, we talk about Leinster, we talk about tempo, and that blasts most teams away. And Bernard was just referencing, the old training drill that some coach, whose name escapes me now, would deliberately impose limits on how quick the ball could be. So, you can't take that out of a ruck for X number of seconds, and let's see how our backline take on a defence which is set. Would it be utterly ludicrous suggestion to think that Leinster might do that in certain URC games? We are going to play today with slow ball of our own volition, as in Gibson Park, you're counting to 3, you're letting the defence set, and then we go and we practice at coming up against teams when we have very slow ball? Because that seems to happen in these big games against the very best sides.
Yeah, I think it's probably moot point because, the way the game has gone now, and you look at Leinster who have the ball for whatever, maybe 60% of a game. They're now, teams now practice playing, on front football, and then they can also play off, back football. So when they lose ground, they can still play and keep the ball if they choose to. And that's kind of what you're talking about, right? Because when that happens, everybody has to back up another 10 yards, right? They can't just stay where they were. They'd be too flat. So, and that's the problem with slow ball is that, if you run too early and the ball doesn't come out, you get ahead of the ball, right? So it checks your run. So I don't think, I think it's more around ensuring you don't get slowed down, right? You can't really, unless you go back to kicking the ball all day, playing off slow ball is not really ideal, nor should you plan for it, nor should you, you shouldn't really be even doing it, right? So it's you need quick ball. And for years, I remember being on shows with you and, everyone was freaking about why we were kicking the ball so much. And for years, everyone was just saying, we don't have quick ball. What do you want us to do about it? And that was the truth, right? But we found a way to turn that screw in the last 24 months. So now you are watching Irish teams with quick ball and provinces with quick ball. And that's in an environment, by the way, where defences are actually, there's one person more in every defensive line now than there was, and two in some cases than there was 5 years ago, right? So the game is now quicker against more defenders, so people are getting better at the breakdown. I think you just need to keep pushing that, I think really the answer is just to keep going after quick ball, right? Or else get better at kick passes and box kicking and catching again, which is something that, if I told you the plan is to go back to box kicking, I think even you as a presenter would be, throwing your eyes up to heaven.
I wouldn't be jumping up and down. But do Leinster need to almost make a plan for that day when the ball is slow? Because that is the template. They
100%. You've got players there who are well able to execute that plan, and you had them at the weekend, right? So the weekend was a unique set of circumstances, right? The flow of the game was because, instead of Leinster having 3 minutes with the ball in the 22, La Rochelle gave away a penalty in front of the sticks that takes 45 seconds to get the tee on, a minute to kick the kick, and then a minute to jog back. That's normally 2.5 minutes of Leinster playing rugby in there. So there's a totally different set of circumstances. I'm not saying that you wouldn't do anything differently looking back at the game, but I don't think there's anything in there in terms of, the roadmap for playing off slow ball is can you turn it into quick ball by getting someone to carry or beat someone, or kick it and get it back, or kick it, and find grass and get a, 50-20 or something, right? It's not like a new thing or a rocket science. Yes. And I think it would actually probably be a regression to what we're all hoping for, or what we've all been asking for. And to be honest, what the players wanted to do.
That's very interesting. Do Leinster have enough do Leinster have a go-to person, a Rocky Elsom type who can turn that slow, stodgy period with a big carry into something?
So that's something that, as an Irish team, you're not guaranteed to have, right? Genetically, we don't, have many of those players. So that's always an issue, right? So you're trying to do it a different way. You're trying to beat someone, or it could be a kick pass, or it could be, now we do have players so Robbie Henshaw's more than capable of doing that for Leinster. And the one or two times and that's where, I suppose if you're picking holes, you say, well, the one chance you did have, in the second half there, the line-out got stuck behind the 9 hit behind the 10 hit behind Robbie. So you end up with you miss that one chance, to change it. And then we were here wondering, are those people there in the team? And I actually think the answer really is that you just need to be so unbelievably perfect to unlock the opportunity to do that. And Leinster probably, I think we're good enough to win most days under most circumstances at the weekend. But on this occasion, if you're nitpicking, there were opportunities that they didn't execute that would have got them that go forward play. And it wasn't because someone wasn't big enough, actually. It was probably because they just didn't execute the skill well enough in that moment. Which
must be the most frustrating aspect of all for Leinster. If there's one thing they would have backed themselves to do, it would be execute those skills, make those passes.
Yeah. And I honestly don't think they played badly, right? It's and that makes it even harder. And it's hard not to pick the one thing you have in your head that went wrong. when you lose a final. But, you know, I think it was an amazing, enthralling game of rugby, right? And, you know, I think, you know, it'd been interesting to see. You know, I'd love to have seen, you know, I don't say, when I look at the game, judging by La Rochelle's kind of efforts, I don't say for sure that if Leinster had gone to the line out and played their own game, and I don't say for sure Rochelle wouldn't have come back. I think that would be discrediting them a little bit. I was impressed with their kind of attitude towards the match for the whole 80 minutes. For a team that hadn't been in that many finals, and they were up against a team who had massive knowledge about how to play finals, you know, and I think that was the most impressive thing for me.
Robin McBride has been speaking today, and he was saying some things that you might expect, like he was talking about the atmosphere in the dressing room after the loss. He said there was a 10-minute period where we were all in a circle staring into space, looking at the floor. Not a word was spoken. Leo came in, said a few words. In fairness, he was trying to pick everyone up. Maybe that was the first time that everyone thought, well, we can't dwell on this too long. And I'm sure you've been in dressing rooms like that. But further to our conversation, Rob McBride was saying teams have a blueprint in how they approach Leinster and how they beat us, slowing the ball down. And he said the first half ball and play time was 15 minutes. Teams are going to try and slow the ball down, especially the teams that are physically bigger than us. He said there were a few uncomfortable meetings within the camp yesterday. We can't hide away from that. And it's very interesting you make that point that when La Rochelle gave away a penalty, one, it was in a very kickable position. We're saying just the way it worked out, but also it stopped that 2-3 minutes, 20 phases that Leinster can take you through and take you into a place that Will Skelton doesn't want to go to. You wonder if, I'll put it to you this way. I'm sure, say you're sitting in that meeting yesterday, because you would be a senior player and always have had views on these things. Say someone poses the question to the group, like, I know they were in kickable positions, but shouldn't we still have kicked to the corner a few times? And even if we hadn't got a try, we could have taken them through phase after phase after phase after phase. We would have had more than 15 minutes ball and play time, and it would have been us that would have come out on top in the closing 10. So shouldn't we have kicked for the corner more and turned down those very obvious 3 points? Discuss. Owen Reddan, what do you think?
So I'd say even for me, you know, as a pundit now here, like, that's a learning. So with the information at the time, I would never have said kick to the corner. That's the honest truth. But I think, having seen it happen, would I react differently against that team if I played them again? Maybe I would, right? But I mean, you know, it's flip a coin here, right? I mean, I watched a lot of your coverage over the Six Nations. I mean, and there'll be people going crazy about not taking points, taking points. There's so many different views out there, right? Yeah. The most important thing is that you've got I'd say 23, but most importantly, actually, in the moment, on the pitch, you've got everybody who understands why you're doing what you're doing and buys into it, and there's a strategy around it, right? You know, if it's kicked to the corner, it's because we practiced this 10 times this week and we're going to pull this off, and we're all buying into that. And if it's because we're kicking our points, you know, it's because at the time of the game we trust our decision makers to make this point, and it's all understood. And you know, it's not like a big discussion at the time, right? It's like we know what we're doing and we're just going to execute on it. So I think that might change. I think it's a fair point. You know, when there's that level of maybe perceived gap in fitness in the teams, do you actually turn those kicks down? I mean, La Rochelle turned down ones near the end, right? And you know, I had people beside me saying they should take their points if they want to win, and they're taking scrums and they're not winning the scrums, and you know, so. There's a lot made about decisions, and then there's what happens after decisions are made, you know, and there's the amount of times in rugby where, for example, you know, La Rochelle turned down their points just as a counterbalance to your point. They took down they had a scrum that went badly, right? And then they fixed that some other way, and then they just keep going and manage to turn it around. All of a sudden it makes the decision right again, right? So it's just that relentless kind of attitude to make it work, right? Whatever you've decided to do. But I think it's a fair point. I think if you had the decision again and you played them again, you might choose differently. But I think at the time, I'm not sure there's anyone on the planet who would have argued with what Leinster were doing. I thought it was the right thing to do.
I did as well, and I certainly thought it at 18-10.
Yeah,
you know, and who could have anticipated Will Skelton would still be carrying like a madman in the 79th minute? Yeah,
and I mean the kick, like, you know, you talk about moments and going for it. Actually, there's a moment. That would explain it really well. Bryce Dulann's kick to the corner, you know, I mean, if anyone wants to watch what going for it is, that's what that is. I've practiced, I know I can kick the ball to 5 yards from the try line. And if I get this wrong, it's a scrum where I'm standing now. But I've practiced enough that I know that this is where I'm going for. And just because everything's at stake, it's going to make me go for it more than it is, shy out and go for the 22. I mean, that was one of the kicks of the year. I mean, and it wasn't really mentioned much, I don't think, on the TV. I didn't hear it. But honestly, my heart sank when I saw where that ball went, because I thought for a minute he'd actually overcooked it. And then it was an amazing penalty. Or sorry, so that was from a penalty to the corner for a line out. So that was unbelievable, right?
Yeah, no,
that really was.
They were great. Yeah.
And to me, tied into the atmosphere of, seeing them going for poaches, it tied into the atmosphere of Dante throwing that pass. It really tied into, lessons around how to win finals, which is, you go for it. You back your skill set, and you don't kind of, half go for things. You go for all of it.
Yeah, such an interesting point. I love that I learned more by winning as well than by losing. You understand some things winning as well. I want to ask about O'Gara before we go, but I just one quick question was the parallels between the Leinster team and the Ireland team are obviously well drawn at this stage, and Robin McBride there talks about a fairly well ensconced blueprint now as to how to take on Leinster. Keith Wood was on our morning show this week, and he was saying that he's not overly upset that this defeat and a defeat of this manner happened a year out from the World Cup, as opposed to if this had happened 2-3 months before World Cup. So can you talk to us about the ramifications for Ireland and how teams will take on Ireland X number of months out from a World Cup now?
Yeah, I think, one of the weaknesses in each of the World Cups I was involved in was, just an ability, a lack of a real decisiveness about the plan and how we played miles out from the World Cup. And other teams were, far more relaxed around how referees were approaching the game. By the time September came around, this is working, we'll try this is working, we'll try that. And we were very much caught on, and unusually so, we wouldn't have been like that in the years leading up to that. So, there's this pressure to define a way you're going to play and a set of solutions you're going to have. I mean, my one hope would be that we're actually adaptable when we get to the World Cup, and that we are able to solve problems on the run and overcome mistakes that we make, and have game plans that work for each problem we face. And I think we are more than, headed that way. And I think that, slowing down the ball is something, that every team tries to do to everybody. And if the team manages to do that to you, you're going to be in trouble, right? Because you're going to have to kick the ball, and then it's just 50-50 stuff. So, the answer back to that is, you got to find ways of making sure you can keep quick ball, right? The team at this point, you'd say, unless the game goes back to 2007, where it was the team that kicked the most, Gary Owens won the World Cup nearly, defence is still going to be a huge part of it, right? Like the last World Cup was decided on defence as well. So that has to be part of the plan, right? So if part of the plan is, that your attack is going to come under pressure, you need a world-class defence that you can go to and force people to play. So, for example, you don't kick the ball out, you kick it long, you force them to either kick the ball out and give you a line out or play back against you. And then you bring them into a world where your defence is on top. And that's another way of winning games, So I just think we need to be adaptable and not make too many, kind of firm identity, firming up our identity too far out about what we are. What I hear, what I see, and I don't have any bigger insight than you or anyone else. What I see coming from interviews or on the pitch, watching them play is a kind of, unstructured kind of, we're ready for anything type of attitude coming up. And I love hearing that. Yeah. And I think that's what you need at a World Cup, right? But yeah. I do think that defence is a massive part of World Cup rugby. And you just saw another team at the weekend win another major trophy with defence. You've seen Sean Edwards for years, deliver with various teams on defence. As pundits for the next 12 months, you might be doing everybody a favour if we also keep an eye on that, right? And keep an eye on those stats, because it's important it's not all about attack. And actually winning World Cups to date has been more around how good your defence is than the attack has been.
So you've played against Ronan O'Gara plenty of times. You've been in plenty of Irish camps with Ronan O'Gara. Did you always think he was destined to be a coach of this calibre?
I don't know, right? You never know when you're playing with someone. Like when I was playing, it was always a thing of be wary of players becoming coaches, right? And you just don't know. You know, and Raj as a player was, you know, so good at solving problems on his own sometimes that he didn't need to kind of, you know, get 4 people doing what he wanted them to do, right? So he had great ideas about how to play. But he'd also might say, just give me the ball here, I'll sort this out, you know, and he'd put it on a sixpence and land it in the corner and everyone will move on, right? But I think he you know, he's got I think, you know, in France, one of the big things about playing rugby is, you know, what's the why? So you have a group of people in front of you on a Monday in France and they don't have, you know, and I mean at club level, they don't have, you know, Irish camp at their fingertips if they play well this weekend in the URC, or they don't have a pathway to you know, a Six Nations, or, you know, they don't have that kind of clear why they're playing. In Ireland, you know, anyone who's come through the system is already extremely motivated. They kind of know what they want. They all want to play for Ireland. They know how to get there. The underage system is incredibly good at teaching them what's required, so they can even make an informed decision about, do I want to give that much to my career or not? I think he would be very, very good at giving French players the why. I think he's someone you'll follow. I think he'll you know, be able to generate a really good emotional buy-in from that group of players. And he's clearly read the game really well, right? He's come up with a great defensive plan to nullify Leinster. And, you know, and I think he's remembered probably, you know, the most important thing about when Munster played Leinster, which was, you know, if Munster didn't win the physical battle, well, if either team don't win the physical battle, it's curtains, right? So, you know, and I'd been in both dressing rooms, and I would say, you know, to call a spade, it was more important always in the Munster dressing room that battle was won, because otherwise, you know, the gap would be quite significant in my view, right? So once Leinster started winning physical battles in that regard, you know, it swung heavily in Leinster's favour, right? Because they probably had, you know, a kind of a deeper pool of athletes and you know, top class players at that time. But, you know, I think he brought that message right through at the weekend. I also think that Donnacha Ryan, you know, if you look at the concentration on those La Rochelle players' faces for their own ball and for Leinster ball at the weekend, it was, to me, a sea change from 12 months ago in terms of what they knew was at stake at every one of these lineouts. And I think they had 100% or very close to it at the weekend. That's also massive. And Raj deciding to get Donnacha in and the two of them working together. And, you know, I heard Raj kind of talking about Donnacha and saying, you know, certain things about Donnacha's approach to the game near the Leinster line. And I just thought it sounded like Ronan was kind of, you know, identifying a part of the game where he thought Donnacha was strong and left him at it, right? Something that Leo's brilliant at, right? Where you know, just that kind of ability to delegate and let people get on with a job, which is really hard to do as a coach, right? Because the temptation is to kind of get stuck in yourself and do everything yourself, or you know, not to let coaches grow around you. But you know, I think it was a real interesting. I'm friends with both of them. So I was devastated for Leo at the weekend, obviously, and obviously, you know, very happy for Raj, right? So it's great they're both doing so well, and great for Irish rugby that we're now, you know, in a position where in foreign lands, you know, our stock is going up and desired. You know, we had, you know, influences in Italian rugby for a long time as well. And I think that's a good thing and should be celebrated, right? You know, the temptation is to start comparing all the amazing coaches we have, but I think, cheapers, you know, it's great that there's kind of a spread out happening now where you've got a few around actually, you know, showing up across outside of Ireland and delivering.
Yeah, it sure is. Interesting times. So this weekend, just to let people know, Ulster Munster's Friday 7:35, and then Leinster have to pick themselves up and go again. Glasgow at the RDS Saturday 3:15, and that must be tough to do after the week they've had, but we'll talk about that next week. EOIN Reddan, it's been great having you on. Our rugby coverage is with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team of us, everyone in. EOIN, thanks so much. That was fascinating. Great to have you on.
Cheers, Joe.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.